November 20th, 1943, Bidio Island, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. Before dawn, the sound of surf rolled against the coral reef that guarded the small island of Bidio. In the distance, hundreds of American ships of the U.S. Navy's Task Force 53 lined the horizon. Among them sat a strange-looking vehicle that many Marines had once laughed at, the LVT-A-4, an armored amphibious tractor nicknamed the Amtrac. Its boxy hull, open turret, and high profile earned it little affection among traditional tank crews. But this morning, its ungainly shape would decide the fate of hundreds of Marines. As the naval bombardment lifted at 0900, waves of landing craft began moving toward the beaches. But something went wrong. The tide, misjudged by planners, was too low. The coral reef stood just inches below the surface, stopping hundreds of Higgins boats and Sherman tanks more than 500 yards offshore. On the radio, confusion spread through the assault waves of the 2nd Marine Division. Colonel David M. Shoup, commanding the landing, realized that the amphibious tractors were the only vehicles capable of crossing the reef. Powered by twin Cadillac engines and wide tracks that churned both water and sand, the LVTs could move where no conventional landing craft or tank could. At Red Beach 2, LVTA-4S from the 2nd Amphibian Tractor Battalion pressed forward, their 75mm howitzers firing over open sights at Japanese bunkers. Marines clung to their sides, riding in under fire. According to after-action reports preserved by the U.S. Marine Corps Historical Division, many of these Amtracs were the only means by which the first assault waves reached the beach. Onlookers aboard the command ships saw the ungainly silhouettes crawl over the reef, slow, exposed, but unstoppable. As Japanese guns tore into the formation, the LVTs kept moving. One Marine officer later wrote, "If it hadn't been for those tractors, none of us would have made it across." The cost was severe. Out of 125 amphibious tractors used at Tarawa, nearly all were destroyed or disabled by the battle's end. But they had proven a decisive truth: mobility, not armor, would win the beaches of the Pacific. The story of the Amtrac began long before Tarawa, not in a military lab, but on the swamps of Florida in the 1930s. Engineer Donald Roebling, grandson of the builder of the Brooklyn Bridge, designed a peculiar tracked vehicle known as the Alligator. His goal was purely humanitarian: to rescue people during hurricanes and floods. In 1935, the Alligator demonstrated its ability to travel through water, mud, and sand with remarkable stability. It caught the attention of U.S. Marine Corps Major General Lewis McCarty Little, who recognized its potential for amphibious warfare, a concept then dismissed by much of the military establishment. By 1940, with war looming, the Marines asked Roebling to adapt his design for military use. The result was the LVT-1 landing vehicle, tracked, a simple cargo carrier with aluminum armor and open top. Initially unarmed, it could ferry troops and supplies from ship to shore, an essential capability for the island-hopping campaigns that would define the Pacific War. Yet many Marines ridiculed it. It looked awkward, thinly protected, and unlike any tank. An engineer's bathtub, some called it. Critics doubted whether it could survive under fire or navigate coral reefs. Even within the Navy's Bureau of Ships, skepticism was widespread. Some officers argued that traditional landing craft were enough. But the Marine Corps persisted. The 1st Amphibian Tractor Battalion was formed in 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. When war erupted, the U.S. suddenly needed a vehicle that could bridge the final 500 yards between the surf and enemy sand. The Alligator's ungainly descendant, now mass-produced by the Food Machinery Corporation (FMC), became the answer to by the time of Tarawa. Newer versions like the LVT-A-1 and later the LVT-A-4 carried heavier armor and turret-mounted 37mm or 75mm howitzers, transforming them from mere transports into direct fire support vehicles. Post-battle analyses of Tarawa were circulated in Washington. The same officers who once dismissed the ugly Duckling were forced to reconsider. Without it, the Marine assault would have failed before it even reached the beach. The War Department immediately ordered thousands more. Amphibious tractor battalions were expanded, trained, and integrated into every major landing plan that followed, from Kwajalein to Saipan. January 31st, 1944, Kwajalein Atoll, Marshall Islands, AS dawn broke over the lagoon. The calm waters concealed jagged coral reefs that stretched for hundreds of yards. American planners remembered Tarawa's costly lesson well. This time, the first waves would ride in on the new LVT A-1S and LVT A-4S, now armed with 37mm and 75mm howitzers, ready to engage enemy bunkers the moment they reached firing range. The 4th Marine Division, supported by the 2nd Armored Amphibian Battalion, surged forward. Unlike the earlier models, these Amtracs were equipped with turreted firepower similar to the M8 howitzer motor carriage, capable of delivering accurate high-explosive rounds from the waterline. As they advanced over the reef, their tracks churned the shallows into foam. Behind them followed conventional LVT-2 cargo carriers, bringing infantry and supplies directly to the beach. Naval gunfire had pounded the islands through the night, but Japanese defenders of the Kwajalein garrison still fought tenaciously from reinforced pillboxes. According to official U.S. Marine Corps records, the armored amphibian's 75mm guns provided critical close and fire support during the first hours ashore, neutralizing enemy positions that had survived the bombardment. When Major General Harry Schmidt, commanding V Amphibious Corps, observed the landings from his command ship, he radioed a simple message: "Amtrac's performing as planned. Continue advance." Their success was decisive. By the end of the campaign, U.S. forces had secured Kwajalein and Roynamore with far fewer losses than Tarawa, due in no small part to the lessons learned and the ugly Duckling vehicles that carried men across the reefs. 5 months later, in June 1944, the Amtrac would again lead the way, this time at Saipan, one of the Mariana Islands. Here, over 700 LVTs of all models formed the first wave under the command of Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith. The LVT-4S, fitted with the powerful 75mm howitzer, engaged fortified positions on the beach while infantry dismounted under fire. War correspondent Robert Sherrod, who witnessed the landings, wrote in Time magazine that the Amtracs came lumbering in like prehistoric beasts, spitting fire from their snouts as they crawled over the reefs. What once drew laughter now drew admiration. They were no longer mere tractors, but armored lifelines. By Saipan's end, planners had come to a new understanding. The LVT was not just a ferry to the beach. It was the spearhead of amphibious warfare, a vehicle that could fight, land, and support all in one motion. September 15, 1944, Palau Islands. 0832 hours, under the blistering tropical sun, the first wave of the 1st Marine Division moved toward the white coral beaches of Palau. Ahead of them churned the LVT-4S of the 3rd Armored Amphibian Battalion, their open turrets swinging as gunners sighted targets ashore. Within minutes, the Amtracs were under intense fire from Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns hidden in coral ridges. Unlike earlier battles, Palau's defenders had prepared a deep, layered defense. According to official Marine Corps records, the Japanese had concealed hundreds of reinforced bunkers, interlocking caves, and camouflaged artillery pieces, all positioned to strike once the Amtracs crested the surf. The LVT-4S pressed forward nonetheless, their 75mm howitzers firing from as close as 200 yards offshore. Several vehicles were knocked out in the opening minutes, but their suppressive fire allowed assault waves to land. Marines of the 1st Regiment, under Colonel Lewis B. Chesty Puller, used the Amtrac sides as partial cover while storming ashore. Eyewitness accounts described the scene with precise detail. Corporal James Cox, a radio operator in Company A, later wrote in his after-action report, "Our LVTs were catching shells from the ridges, but they didn't stop. They kept the beach open long enough for the first platoons to get inland. Despite heavy losses, the armored tractors fulfilled their role as mobile artillery." On Palau's narrow beachhead, only 500 yards deep, the LVT-4's short-barreled 75mm guns delivered immediate fire support where Shermans could not yet reach. Many Shermans of the 1st Tank Battalion were still bogged down or unable to come ashore until engineers cleared paths through coral and wreckage. The cost was high. Over half of the Amtracs engaged were disabled by the second day. But the strategic lesson endured. The Marines could now execute amphibious assaults on even the most forbidding terrain. As after-action analyses later recorded at Quantico's Amphibious Warfare School, the Peleliu operation demonstrated that armored amphibians were indispensable in bridging the gap between naval gunfire and land-based tanks. They could absorb the first shock, suppress beach defenses, and maintain momentum until conventional armor joined the fight. Their ungainly appearance, once mocked by tankers and infantry alike, had become a symbol of determination. On Peleliu's coral plains, the ugly ducklings had once again done what no Sherman could. April 1st, 1945, Hagushi Beaches, Okinawa, Ryukyu Islands. AT-0830, the largest amphibious operation of the Pacific War, unfolded across the western coast of Okinawa. The assault involved more than 1,200 landing craft and amphibious vehicles, carrying 4 divisions of the U.S. 10th Army. Among them, the LVT A-4, the armored variant of the amphibious tractor, once again took the lead. The weather was clear, the surf calm. Across the horizon, the sea shimmered with hundreds of silhouettes, Amtracs of the 1st and 8th Amphibian Tractor Battalions, alongside LVT-4 transports, each loaded with Marines and Army infantrymen. Overhead, carrier-based aircraft struck inland positions, while naval guns thundered in rhythmic sequence. When the first waves hit the beach, there was an unexpected silence. The Japanese had chosen not to defend the shoreline, instead fortifying the rugged Shuri Line inland. Yet, for the assault troops of the 6th Marine Division and 96th Infantry Division, that silence was deceptive. The Amtracs pushed deep into the island's western plains, ferrying men, ammunition, and artillery across beaches that would soon become logistical hubs for the entire campaign. And the following days, the LVT-4S adapted once more. They were used not only as assault vehicles but also as mobile command posts, artillery carriers, and casualty evacuators, roles that underscored their versatility. Some units were retrofitted with radio relays or loaded with supplies to sustain forward lines. When the inland fighting intensified around Shuri, Amtracs ferried men across flooded rice paddies and terrain that immobilized Sherman tanks. Reports from the U.S. Army Center of Military History note that in the muddy lowlands of Okinawa, the LVTs remained the only dependable tracked vehicles capable of continuous operation. By war's end, over 18,600 LVTs of all models had been produced. From their humble beginnings as civilian rescue craft, they had evolved into one of the most versatile armored vehicles of the Pacific theater. After Japan's surrender, many LVT A-4S were repurposed for post-war operations, some serving in Korea, others sold to allied nations. But their reputation, once the subject of mockery, endured. In Marine Corps archives, commanders repeatedly cited them as essential to the success of amphibious warfare. General Alexander A. Van de Grift, Commandant of the Marine Corps, summarized it best in a post-war assessment. Without the amphibian tractor, the Pacific campaigns could not have been fought as they were. From Tarawa's bloody reef to Okinawa's vast beaches, the ungainly Amtrac had turned ridicule into respect, proving that in war, function often triumphs over form.